I open this public meeting of the Council of Deans by expressing our faith in God. Our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. I'd like to express my gratitude to all of you for attending this oral lecture of Dr. Christopher Welty. In particular, I'd like to thank his family and welcome them to the Netherlands. I know his father and mother are in the audience and all his children. So a special welcome to you, and I hope you feel welcome in this country. And now, without further ado, I'll give the floor to the orator. Please, Dr. Welty.
Thank you. Just as evidence that I did write it up beforehand. Thank you all for coming. The rector and the dean representing the rector, my faculty colleagues, students, friends, members of the press, and of course my family who came all the way from New York to be here. I began my research career, it's going to be one of those, as a graduate student at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, a fine Dutch university in Troy, New York in 1989. I left the field of computer networking for artificial intelligence. To put things in perspective, at the time that was sort of like jumping off the iceberg onto the Titanic. The group that I'd been in had just secured funding for something we called the Internet. And I had just finished roundly rejecting a proposal for this ludicrous World Wide Web. I rejected it on the grounds that it would become dominated by porn. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence, the field that I was joining, was passing into a period that would later be called the AI winter. First of several. But I'm not here to lament such decisions. Indeed, I'm quite proud of it, the way fans of certain music groups take pride in having listened to them before they were popular. Although this is probably closer to after they were no longer popular. Still, I joined the AI research community when it was not popular, and I stuck with it through thick and thin for more than 20 years until that magic moment 6 years ago when we changed the world. I won't say that it was my team that made AI popular again, that brought us into the age where pundits shout for ethics in AI. You know you've succeeded when ethicists start paying attention to you. No, I won't say that we made it popular, but you might read it some places. In 2006, I was a member of the question answering team at IBM Research, and someone higher up in the company asked us whether it was possible to build a computational system that would play the American TV quiz show Jeopardy. Of course we said no. A year later, they asked the same question. This time we responded, "Why do you want to know?" And when we heard their answer, which was that they wanted to make it the next grand challenge 10 years after the, at that time, famous chess challenge, the Deep Blue system that beat Garry Kasparov, the reigning champion at chess. Well, we decided to take a look at that problem. A team of 5 of us did a feasibility study, and after that we decided to take on the challenge. The original team of 12 people, pictured there on the top left, began then in 2007, and in 3 years the team had grown to 35 people, and we were in the final stages testing our system every week against former contestants on the show in real game settings, running, meanwhile, thousands of experiments against a corpus of over 200,000 prior questions and answers that fans of the show had kept in an online forum. For a human, playing a quiz game like Jeopardy is hard. It's hard because you have to know a lot. The breadth of knowledge touches science, history, popular culture, literature, and a million other things. And you have to be fast. Not that I myself am particularly good at the game, but I often find myself knowing I know the answer to a question, yet unable to produce it in the 1 or 2 seconds the competitive environment of the game gives you to answer. For a machine, memorizing information is not hard. We have many ways of storing data, such that we could have stored the entire contents of the web on our machines if it would have been useful. We can chain together enough machines to provide fast access to that data. But for a computational system, a machine, the hard part is understanding the question. And of course, recognizing what, among all the information it has stored, is an answer. It's one thing to memorize Wikipedia, it's another thing to understand it. This was our accomplishment. No system had ever exhibited this depth and breadth of language understanding before. A few points of interest here before I continue. First, that what was trivial for the machine is what was hard for people, and vice versa. This lesson, with just a little more that I'll talk about for the rest of the few minutes I have up here, is the essential aspect of what we're calling cognitive computing. Machine and human intelligence are natural allies. We complement each other well. And nothing before Watson ever effectively dispelled the much more exciting science fiction meme of artificial intelligence as the ultimate enemy. Suddenly, it became clear to many people that AI could make machines infinitely more useful. Second point of interest, that we did not need to store the entire contents of the web in order to have the knowledge we needed to compete, thus finally validating the proposition that selfies and cat videos do not contribute to the sum of human knowledge. Seriously, of the hundreds of petabytes of data on the web in 2011, we only needed about a gigabyte. So for the logarithmically challenged, that is less than 1/1,000,000% of the web. But this does not actually say that only 1/1,000,000% of the web is useful. It says 1/1,000,000% was useful to play Jeopardy. As much as I love Jeopardy, and I do, it is not and does not claim to be the ultimate arbiter of what is useful knowledge. At Google, and in my research here at the VU, where I jointly find myself today, we have found the massive data on the web, including selfies and cat videos, to be extraordinarily useful for numerous non-Jeopardy playing tasks, and I will get to that. Third, our scientific advance was a public spectacle. It was witnessed by more than 50 million Americans, even more people around the world, and received front-page news coverage everywhere. My taxi driver even recognized me the next morning, and that was an accomplishment. In February 2001, Watson was one of the most important and newsworthy events, becoming part of popular culture, being covered and joked about in late-night talk shows. It made most 2011 year-in-review highlights. As academics devoted to serious study, it is easy and tempting to dismiss with a desultory wave the Watson spectacle, and in 2007, when our team was sitting around a meeting room discussing the challenge before us, we felt genuine apprehension that the pop culture angle would mean that the scientific community would not take the accomplishment seriously. I'm not ashamed to admit that I was one of the strongest proponents of this apprehensive view, nor am I ashamed to admit that I was wrong about it, and came to see that I was wrong about it, and that now I consider it to be of utmost importance that we, as academics devoted to serious study, do a much better job of communicating to the outside world what it is we do, why it's important, and why we care. And if that means appearing on stage with Lady Gaga every once in a while, then so be it. You can't see my poker face. Sorry. I hope I didn't spit on the front row there in my fervor. But the good news is that cooler heads prevailed, and my early apprehension was overruled, and we began our 4-year mission to boldly go where no one had gone before. During those years of development, we underwent several dramatic changes to our methods, challenged our own tacit assumptions, and forced ourselves to define and live by metrics that we believed in. We would have one and only one chance on a very public stage to demonstrate a machine that could understand and answer questions at human expert ability. We couldn't deceive ourselves or adopt easy metrics in order to get a paper published or impress some supervisor. It had to work. But the theme of my talk today is change. We changed our thinking dramatically in those 4 years. And I would like to focus on the changes that led to what we came to call cognitive computing, and my chair here at the VU. As I've said, Watson was the first public demonstration of a real AI system that made the value of such systems clear. It didn't try to take over the world. It appeared smart, and a machine with superhuman question-answering ability suddenly seemed, especially to people in business, very valuable. I mean, how many times a day do you need to know the height of Mount Everest? I would say 10, at least 10 times a day. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, or the glacier. Anyway, today, AI is everywhere, and we have a plethora of AI abilities that people find useful, like automatic spam detection, searching photo images, self-driving cars, and on and on and on. It's not that Watson made these things possible. It's that Watson changed the public perception of artificial intelligence so that it was okay to say that these were AI systems. Well, that's all fine and good. Good job, Chris. Pat myself on the back. But the most fundamental change represented by cognitive computing is something else. That it's now okay for machines to be wrong. We can build highly tuned machine systems that are wrong sometimes and still be seen as useful. This is a very traditional human quality, of course. I'm only human, we say, bound to make some mistakes. Cognitive computing is about building systems that will make some mistakes. Now, what did I say here? Mistakes. Mistakes for machines. Machines don't make mistakes. They may break from time to time, and then they'll need to be repaired, but mistakes? That's not what we've come to expect. Surely Watson couldn't have won if it made mistakes, right? Well, here's a question from Jeopardy that a very early version of Watson tried to answer. This Frenchman is considered the father of bacteriology. I'm sure many of you, well, there's not that many of you, but I'm sure there are people in the audience that know the answer to this question. It's Louis Pasteur. What did Watson think the answer was? What are you laughing at? That's right. How tasty was my little Frenchman? How tasty. What does that even mean? Is this some chilling example of what the machine was thinking, eating little Frenchman? Well, cognitive computing systems, as I just said, can make mistakes, just as humans can, but they make different kinds of mistakes. Just like memorizing everything is easy for a machine, understanding natural language is easy for a person, the mistakes we make are different. We both make them, but we do it in different ways. A human who didn't know the answer to this question might have guessed Napoleon or Maurice Chevalier. Why? The Frenchman. In this early version of Watson, from 2008, I should add, we had restricted the possible answers that it considered to titles of Wikipedia articles. So, How Tasty is My Little Frenchman is the title of a Wikipedia article that describes a Brazilian movie of the same name, based on the true story of a French ship that landed in what is now Brazil. The entire crew were eaten by cannibals. Tasty. Why did Watson think this was the answer? Well, the words in the question featured prominently in the Wikipedia article, and the article was very short, which fooled one particular algorithm in our system called TF-IDF into thinking that this was a very important document to the question. It's a different kind of mistake, one that you might make yourself. The final Jeopardy-winning version of Watson would have gotten that question correct, but even in this early version from 2008, with seemingly silly answers like the one I just showed you, it performed better than average people at the game show Jeopardy. And there it is. Machines making mistakes, but still being useful, still being better than people. This is a big change. We had come to expect machines, and especially computers, to be unfailingly precise. That imprecision was something to be fixed. But such an expectation for most intelligent tasks, like answering questions, is unrealistic. To be useful, it has to be correct often enough, and when it's incorrect, it's helpful if it's noticeable. Let's look at two more examples. In the category First Ladies, she was born Thelma Catherine Ryan on March 16, 1912, in Nevada. I'll wager none of you know the answer, probably not even the Americans in the audience, but given a bit of time, you might be able to make a good guess based on the date. Watson's answer. Wow. Okay, even though you don't know the answer, probably know that that's not it. Now, Watson, and if you saw the show, you know that Watson showed its top choices on the screen. The two highest choices that it had, that it distinguished between, were Richard Nixon and Abigail Adams. And when it answered Richard Nixon, a high-ranking IBM executive was absolutely furious. He happened to be there at the day seeing this test of the system. "How can it give that answer?" he said. "Richard Nixon is obviously not a first lady. It should at least have given Abigail Adams." Abigail Adams there on the right was the wife of the second president, John Adams. So do you agree? Richard Nixon is obviously not the right answer. To those of us who don't know the answer, Abigail Adams at least sounds plausible. She's a woman. If you're American, you probably know that she's a first lady. But now, which species of intelligence is showing its dark side? Who cares about gender identity? Obviously we do. I argued at the time, and I maintain today, that given these two incorrect choices, actually Richard Nixon is the best answer. Because the correct answer was his wife, Pat Nixon. Abigail, frankly, that is a stupid answer. She was dead before 100 years before 1912. Richard Nixon may not be a first lady, but that is obvious. And that answer gives us something that we can actually use to get to the right answer. So it's not just that the machine has to be right often enough. It should be helpful, even when it's wrong. Watson's most famous faceplant was the last question of the first game. Honestly, I find it hard to even read this question, but I'll give it a go. In the category U.S. cities, its largest airport is named after a World War II hero, its second largest after a World War II battle. If you've traveled a lot by plane in the US, you might know the answer here. If not, most Americans guess New York because they know JFK is the airport there and that Kennedy was a World War II hero. The correct answer is Chicago. The airports are O'Hare and Midway. Our two competitors both got the answer correct. Watson's answer, as you may remember, is Toronto. Toronto, not even a U.S. city. Unless, let me see if our president is up to anything today. Nope. Okay. Still part of Canada. Okay, that's good news. Well, there's so much to this question, but I could have spoken about this question for all 45 minutes, but I'll just talk about two aspects of it. First, as I mentioned before, memorization for a machine is easy. Watson has perfect geographical knowledge. It knows every city, town, district, country, border, population, and so much more. It knows more than anyone here. Even if there was someone here from the geography department, I'm not sure, is anyone from the geography department? If you were, it would know more than you. And Watson knows, as probably the rest of us do not, although I know it now, there are 6 cities in the US named Toronto. There they are: Toronto, Kansas, Toronto, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. Toronto, Ohio is apparently a reasonably large city that has an airport. Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota. 6 US cities, and here, this exhaustive knowledge that Watson had actually hurt it, because when it looked for evidence that Toronto was a US city, it found it. Secondly, and I want to say most importantly, Watson was 90% sure that its answer was wrong. That's what those question marks meant. That's an actual photograph from the TV broadcast. Those question marks there were our way of communicating that, ordinarily, with this degree of uncertainty, it would not have answered the question, but this was one of the 4 questions, according to the rules of the game, that it's forced to answer. Unlike its human counterparts, however, when a cognitive computing system like Watson says it's 90% sure about something, or in this case, 10% sure, it was 90% sure it was wrong. 90% to a cognitive computing system means 90% of the time that I say I'm 90% sure, I'm right. For people, when we say I'm 90% sure, it doesn't mean anything, right? We don't really deal with probabilities well. Even statisticians use expressions like that. And although there's evidence that probabilities affect us deeply and affect the way we learn, we don't retain the numbers. We don't have sort of provenance for a lot of our knowledge. Cognitive computing systems are based on probabilities. They understand them in ways humans don't. It's essential for systems that can be wrong sometimes to be able to reflect on their own confidence, to know what they know. So stepping back now, these changes that Watson thrust upon us were not only changes in the public perception of AI, they reflected the results of important changes that we, scientists who had been working in AI for many years, underwent in our own thinking during the 4 years we developed Watson. Changes. So why do I say even the changes are changing, which is the title of this talk? What changed that is changing? The earliest conception of artificial intelligence that goes back to the 50s or earlier is of computers as the perfect engines for mechanized thought. Mechanized, rational thought, free of emotion or bias, capable of finding the right answer every time. I suggest that this idea of intelligence, even of rationality, is a naive one, concocted by men who idealized these characteristics of their own intelligences. These were exclusively mathematicians, these founders of AI. And they believed that mathematical thinking was the most important characteristic of intelligence. And when new people came along to study AI, like me, we were always mathematicians too, damn good ones, I'll tell you. And this idea was carried on. So if mathematical thinking is primary, working from that assumption, then logic, the logic invented informally by Aristotle and refined by many over the eons, including Newton, Frege, Russell, Gödel, and so on, logic is the way that thinking happens. Logic then defines the syntax and semantics of intelligence, sometimes described as the language of thought. Most of the people in the original Watson group, myself foremost, came from this tradition. And it made so much sense to me, it never occurred to me to question it. Human intelligence is an application of some formal logical system to data collected by each individual. Emotions and aberration, uncertainty and error, obviously. Well, that had to change. It may be clear to some of you in the audience that this is really a shallow and limited account of intelligence, but it was a slow and painful realization for me and many people in AI. Some still cling to the old ways. Logic had put a stranglehold on the science of AI, stunting its growth and preventing it from solving anything but toy problems. But it was so deeply ingrained in the academic mindset of this research area. And, well, you know how that goes. Let's face it, we are not all the free thinkers we believe we are. There was an upstart movement in AI in the 1990s that was pushing for change. And by 2007, when we were working on Watson, they had reached enough legitimacy, especially in the processing of natural language, that we were using some of these inexact techniques on our team. But we all believed they were just hacks. Quick and dirty solutions that would eventually be replaced when we had figured the logic out. But we were wrong. Watson did not use any logic, or at least it didn't use any form of logical reasoning. This turned out to be useless for our purposes. Now, I don't really have the time or indeed the patience anymore to explain exactly why logical reasoning had proved useless for Watson, but let's say that any knowledge one might represent will contain a certain amount of error. And logical reasoning assumes perfect knowledge. It assumes that to the extent that in order to prove some hypothesis is true, we just need to negate it and show that it leads to a contradiction. If there's already a contradiction in your knowledge, then you can prove anything to be true. This process is really too brittle for understanding human language, which is full of ambiguity and rich in variety. I've included here a section from a famous Monty Python sketch, the Dead Parrot sketch. And for those of you who have background in computer science or AI, I want you to read that last bit there and imagine how much you would have to do to recognize that those all say the same thing. Socrates is passed on, this mortal is no more, he has ceased to be, he's expired, gone to meet his maker, he's a stiff, bereft of life, he rests in peace, he's pushing up the daisies, his metabolic processes are now history, he's off the twig, he's kicked the bucket, he's shuffled off his mortal coil, run down the curtain, and joined the bleeding choir invisible. This is an ex-Socrates. Yes. Well, looking back, I liken the early period of AI to early mechanics. Logic is the arithmetic of intelligence. It's the rate times time equals distance of pre-Newtonian mechanics. The 50 years for which this was the central assumption of AI are like the 2,000 years that pre-calculus sufficed for understanding how things move. Logic isn't useless for AI, but it's overly simplistic to be its foundation or even a significant part of it. It works only for the simplest of cases, but like rate times time equals distance, when it does work, it works nicely. For better coverage of human intelligence, we needed to turn to statistical methods. primarily regression techniques. This was sort of like the discovery of calculus or integral calculus. And for our team, it was a big change. Every bit of computation that Watson did has an associated score, and these scores were combined using logistic regression. When a computational system that can be wrong sometimes needs itself to understand that, it's necessary to have a more continuous estimate of truth. A more continuous estimate of truth. Logic, you see, has a simple, discrete notion of truth. Black and white, true and false, that's it. Since that's all there is, if something's not true, it's false. If something's not false, it's true. That's all there is. Got to be one or the other. So simple. Those were the days. But insufficient. Like rate times time equals distance. So, why is a discrete truth value insufficient? Watson needed to evaluate and synthesize all the evidence it found. Let's say you're trying to answer, he was the first to summit Mount Everest. What's the answer? Watson would try to do it by dropping the stop words from the question and searching for documents that contain the rest of the words, in this case, first, summit, and Mount Everest. That would result in a set of documents that would contain evidence, evidence written in various passages. All of this evidence needs to be combined somehow. None of it is completely certain, and Watson had to learn how to combine all this evidence by training on thousands of questions. Now, Watson didn't use these training questions to memorize the answers. That would have been easy to do, but it wouldn't help, since Jeopardy never asks the same question twice. What the training does is it gives us the ability to learn how to combine that evidence. Already, by 2011, after our appearance on the show, new cognitive computing systems were appearing that did lots of cool things. Companies like eBay, Netflix, Facebook, and of course Google were hesitant at first to add the AI label. But this changed fast in the post-Watson spectacle, and already the changes started changing. Just as mechanics moved from Newtonian to relativistic, the AI world evolved quickly past simple statistical models into something called deep learning. Deep learning bypasses a lot of the human engineering that went into Watson to solve what are, for people, very simple perceptual problems like speech understanding and image understanding. So here we see an example of Google's awesome photo search. I don't know if you've seen it. People take so many photos these days, mostly on their phones, but they don't have time to label each one. Still, you want to be able to search them. Photo search has learned how to recognize a few thousand fairly simple categories of things in photos, like mountains, cities, nighttime, parties, and of course cats. We're really good at cats. Here, I've searched for coastline pictures. Pretty impressive. That's no labeling there, just looking at the pictures. But it's a cognitive computing system, remember, so it's okay to be wrong. I don't expect it to be perfect. And there in that top corner, we can see a picture that doesn't look like coastline to me. That's me sitting on a mountain, acting like a wise guru dispensing advice. Oh, good, it's small. You can't really see it, but that's what I'm doing. But even with that mistake, this is very useful. And I no longer need to ask my grad students to label my photos anymore. So that's progress. And this is what I meant all those minutes ago, when most of you were still awake, and I said, we do have a use for so much of the data that's on the web. Photo search works because so many people put their photos on the web. Speech recognition works because so many people talk to their phones. Self-driving cars work because so many people drive them. None of these are perfect systems. They will make mistakes. But the good news is that we are the baseline. We, us in this room, and the further billions of our brethren out there. Cognitive computing systems will make mistakes, but fewer than any one of us does. Way fewer. Deep learning is now fully engaged and is producing new capabilities faster than any one of us ever expected. After surmounting tasks that people do every day without really thinking, like recognizing images, understanding speech, cognitive computing is turning to tasks that require more intelligence, like this one that I actually worked on, in which we try to predict from a document you're writing what you might write next. It's a useful tool. We have about 1.5 million users a day. Some will argue deep learning is happening because there's so much data, and that's true. We have a lot more data than we did 10 years ago. Some will argue that we have a lot more computing power, also true. Some will argue that advances in algorithms have spurred on deep learning and its applications, again, true. But my message is about change, the power of change. All these advances have descended like an avalanche because we finally accepted change. But the power of change hasn't stopped. Once we accepted that things can change, we were way more open to continue changing, to questioning whether we've already gotten stuck in a new rut. Just as relativistic mechanics gave way to quantum mechanics before most of that community had even accepted relativity, deep learning is on the verge of giving way to something else. And I will give you just a few hints about that. Throughout this talk, I've been very careful to say that cognitive computing systems, like Watson, are better than any of us. Watson is better than anyone at playing Jeopardy. But is it better than all of us together? Do you think that with sufficient organization, the group of people in this room could beat Watson at Jeopardy? In 1906, Sir Francis Galton at a county fair in Plymouth, England, had 787 people who attended the fair try to guess the weight of an ox. Not one of the participants got the right answer, or so he reported, but the average of all the participants' guesses was accurate to within 1% of the ox's true weight. This is a powerful example, and one that is often referred to as the wisdom of the crowds, or collective intelligence. AI and cognitive computing systems need people to give them the right answers for problems that they don't know how to solve yet. So, those answers have to be gathered from people. But the first thing you encounter when you start trying to gather information from people is they don't always agree. In Galton's case, the problem was simple. Guess the ox's weight, take the average. That ended up being close enough to the real answer. But what about the question we looked at before? Who was the first to climb Mount Everest? Well, there's actually some controversy. Was it Mallory or Hillary? For all we know, the natives of the area climb the mountain all the time. So is this question really which European was first to climb Mount Everest, or which white guy was first to climb Mount Everest? And if you ask enough people the question and try to get them to answer it, you start to see disagreement. This will reveal the Hillary versus Mallory controversy, the cultural centricity of the question itself. I say this to you now, and you probably have no problem understanding what I'm saying about the question. But do you see the problem? What is the answer to the question? More importantly, how do we account for the fact that the answer varies? That in fact, every answer varies. And the way the answers vary itself varies from question to question. It may vary depending on the time, the religion, the culture, the region, the city, the history, the availability of some resource, the way the question was phrased, and so many other things that are impossible to enumerate. And it doesn't even stop there. There are a lot of questions that if you ask the same person the same question at a different time, or ask the same person the same question in a different way, the answer varies. How could that be true? The problem is that questions are never as simple as they sound. There's a lot of complexity that we tend to boil away when answering. And if you begin to reveal some of those dependencies, we people, will start to account for those dependencies and our answers. That all makes sense, at least it should. I'm not trying to be controversial here, but what does it imply for cognitive systems? Poor old Watson, a dinosaur already at 6, was trained to answer questions that had one and only one right answer. Jeopardy questions were engineered to be that way. The people who wrote the questions already knew the answers. But in the world beyond Jeopardy, real questions are asked by people who don't know the answer and may not be aware of the intricate dependencies that must be specified for someone to give even a good enough answer. They might not even know the right words to use. Look at this. This is a real voice query that I did not have very much trouble finding from Google's search logs. I'm not sure what the right thing to do would be here. If this had come to me as a person directly, I'd probably respond in some obnoxious New York fashion. But it does sound like it might be an emergency, maybe something medical. It would be nice to have an appropriate response here, at least communicate that we don't understand the question. When we start considering that this continued broadening of the scope of something as a priori simple as question answering, suddenly statistics and even deep learning appear to be trivial simplifications. In our latest work, our group is looking at a deeper treatment in which we change something even more fundamental than logic was to AI. I'm talking about truth. Even when statistics came along and disrupted the world of logic and AI, even when deep learning came along and disrupted that, we still had, under it all, this innocuous and fundamental assumption. Every problem has a right answer. Every question has a true, or maybe several true, answers. In our experiments, gathering information from lots of people, it's become clear that this is an oversimplification. Truth is as rich, subtle, nuanced as anything else we've ever encountered. You may think I'm talking about fake news or something like that, but no, I'm talking about the cases that I mentioned here today. From Edmund Hillary to treating typhus. Evidence, context, time, history, gender, race, religion, economics, geography, weather, and on and on and on. All these things affect what we believe to be truth. I think this will be a big change. Can you handle it? And now, to close, I would like to take a moment to address the students in the audience. My message was about change. My message was about lessons that we learned in a very big and a very important project. Don't be afraid to change. Don't be afraid to question your elders, and especially your heroes. Do it politely, please, but don't be afraid to do so. Don't get stuck in a rut. Question your own biases and your own assumptions. So thank you all for listening. First, I'd like to thank the board of directors of the university for their faith in me, and as to Google as well, who approved my joint appointment here. I would also like to thank IBM, although I no longer work there, but their support of the Watson project was certainly the highest point in my professional career. I especially want to thank his eminent Professor Schreiber, who deserves the most credit for my appearing here today. Thanks for all your work when you led the Web and Media Group, became head of the department, and now as the dean. You made this an institution I wanted to be part of. Of course, the rest of the faculty and staff of the VU end of the UVA, who were responsible for this appointment and went to great lengths to make it so. I have to acknowledge my family, who came all the way from New York, my father and mother, who did all those annoying parental things during my youth to be sure I continued my studies and made it up here. Top of the world, Ma. My children, who gave me the opportunity to appreciate how hard it was for my parents to have done all that. I love you, and I'm so glad you're here. And finally, to my wife, who is my closest friend and colleague, my inspiration and my compass, who made many of my slides beautiful, and who shared the creation of many of these ideas. Thank you. I don't know how I ever lived without you. Ik heb gezegd.
Dear Professor Welty, dear Chris, thank you for this lovely speech. So, just after Obama finished his presidency, you make change again a prominent term. You're very good in titles. I remember about 10 years ago, I think it's actually 10 years ago, I invited you to give a talk at a conference in Korea, South Korea that is. And you gave it the interesting title, How I Was Right Even When I Was Wrong. I think that title more or less sums you up in various ways. One is, we as a university, we sometimes blame ourselves that we're being too modest. I think we have done a very good thing by getting you on board, because you lack that property completely. On the other hand, you actually use this non-modesty to become very modest and to talk about how truth is actually a kind of overrated quality, which is very interesting. If you look back at your career, the time that you spent as what I can best call as an ontologist in the 90s, with your visit in your sabbatical in Italy, very interesting time. Most of people in that particular field would have continued in the same way. But you moved on and actually used that, not threw it away, but used that knowledge to move on in not a direction, but still keeping your old faith. So maybe not logical reasoning, but logical representation is still useful as long as you don't interpret it too logically. I think that would sum it up. So we are very grateful that you've joined our university. In particular, as a communicator, you are a great asset, I think, for this university. You have started with colleagues the Watson course, which is now done both for academia and for people from various parts of business. Very successful course. Our students love to participate in that. You've given us direct contacts with IBM, your former employer, and also with Google. And you bring us this area of cognitive computing, a nice alliteration, also a nice title, but also something I think which is really an area that is, in a sense, changing the face, not just of AI, but of various aspects of society. So, we are very happy to have you as one of our colleagues, actually honored to have you as one of our colleagues. And I would like to congratulate you, and also like to congratulate the department with this asset, this new trump card in their midst. And I also like to congratulate your family, in particular your father, who is also joined the cortege, and your mother, and your 3 children. Okay. With this, I'd like to conclude this ceremony. When leaving the hall, please give precedence to the people sitting in the front rows, the cortege and the family. And to close this public session of the Council of Deans, I'd like to do that by pronouncing the doxology. Please stand. The name of the Lord be praised, now and into eternity.